Hi everyone, I'm Josie Osborne. I'm the mayor of Tofino, and today I am going to give a presentation on the results of the thought exchange that the District of Tofino recently conducted as a way of asking people who live in Tofino and the region what they think is important to think about as our communities in the region responds to and recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we use this online thought exchange platform as a way of being able to gather the thoughts and ideas of people. And today's presentation will focus on what thought exchange is and how it works, who responded to it and participated in it, and what the results were and how we're going to use those results. You can find a written version of this presentation on the district's website, so www.tofino.ca / COVID-recovery, and that will give you a chance to look through it in some more detail. But today we'll take the next half hour or so to go through the results, and hopefully you'll learn a lot. We are going to use these results to help guide the recovery planning that the District of Tofino is doing, but we're also hoping that you will use it in your own family or household or your own business's recovery planning and your thinking about what is important to people in Tofino, and also to think a little bit about where people agree and where they disagree and how all perspectives are valid and people have them, and how we can build some bridges with each other and better understand each other as we collectively work together to recover from the pandemic. So let's get into it. And here we go. So Thought Exchange, it's an online platform that lets us lead some challenging conversations with open-ended questions and enables people to share their thoughts on the matter. So this is a platform that can be used for groups that are as few as 10 people or as many as 10,000 people, and brings everyone together in what's called an exchange. So people submit their own answers, and then they also get to rate other people's answers. It's a really effective way of hearing from a lot of people in a relatively short amount of time. And it enables us to think and share what we really think, because it's anonymous. You don't need to create an account to participate in a thought exchange, and you need to be quite concise in the words that you share. So this enables us to make better decisions because we know what people are really thinking, and we also know how people are interacting with each other. So there's a level playing field on a thought exchange. And the data analytics behind the thought exchange allow us to tease out some of the differences and see how people are interacting with different ideas and where the differences are and where the agreements are. And that's where it gets really, really interesting. So we asked this open-ended question. People shared their thoughts, and then they were able to rate each other's thoughts from 1 to 5 using a star system. And they could go back over the 8 days of this thought exchange and be able to share more thoughts or rate more thoughts. So the question that we asked, and we ran our thought exchange from May 4th to 11th, 8 days, we asked people what is important to be thinking about as our communities in the West Coast region responds to COVID-19 and prepares for the future. So this is a really open-ended question that people could answer in a wide variety of ways, from things that they think is important to think about to ways that they're feeling and the attitudes that they have. So who participated? 607 people entered the thought exchange, which is really impressive. And of those 607 people, 301 actually shared thoughts. So they actually wrote thoughts into the thought exchange. And then 352 people rated those thoughts. So what that means is that some people shared thoughts and others rated thoughts but didn't share thoughts. So they just read other people's thoughts and then gave them a star rating, which is fine. And 398 people actually explored the thoughts. So this means 607 people entered on the online platform. About 400 of them actually moved around and looked and read. 352 rated the thoughts, and 300 thoughts were actually shared by different people, or 300 people shared their thoughts. This is a really impressive participation. And if you look at the fact that 710 thoughts were shared, over 31,000 ratings, and you divide 710 into 31,000, that's over 40 ratings per thought, which is a high degree of participation. And a successful thought exchange is usually about 30 thoughts or 30 ratings per thought. A less successful, maybe around 10, but we had over 40. So that shows a really high degree of engagement. When you entered the thought exchange, we asked 4 questions to help us learn a little bit more about you. So we asked where you live, and we asked what age bracket you fell into. And so this shows a little bit of who was there. And so we can see that the vast majority of people who participated were Tofino residents. And we can also see that quite a few people fell into 3 age brackets. And so the distribution of ages between 0 and over 80 is similar to the actual distribution of ages in Tofino, but we did see that people under 30, so 19 years and younger, there were 0, and people 20 to 29, there was just 12% of the respondents in that age bracket. So we see that people under 30 are a little underrepresented in this work. And we see that people aged 40 to 49 were a little overrepresented compared to the rest of Tofino's population. And about 4/5 of the respondents, the red circle there, are people who are of working age, really, between 20 and 60. So it's important to understand that as we go through some of the results from the thought exchange, we're looking mostly at the answers from people who are in that working age range, and that we did not capture the voices of children or youth, people younger than 19. We also asked people if they identified as First Nations, Aboriginal, Inuit, Métis, or Indigenous. And you can see the results that very few did, and 87% identified as not being in any of those groups. And then we asked people whether they considered themselves to be involved in the tourism industry or not. So we didn't define what that meant. We let people answer that for themselves. 59% of people said they consider themselves to be directly involved in tourism, and 34% said they do not consider themselves to be directly involved in tourism. So we'll get into some of the results now. This is a word cloud that shows a sample of what was shared in the thoughts, and the size of the word is related to the star rating of the thoughts that they appear in. So not the number of times that the word is used overall, but the thoughts where they appeared that were very highly rated, more towards 5 stars than 1 star, makes the word a bit bigger. The color doesn't actually mean anything. But what's great about a word cloud is that it gives you a sense of some of the dominant thoughts or themes that are going to come out in the ideas that were shared. So seeing words like safety, parks, health, residents, you'll see as we go through the results that these words appear over and over and over again. So now we'll get into what people actually said. And I want everyone to remember that although over 600 people entered the thought exchange, not all of them were from Tofino. About 440 people were actually from Tofino. So the top 10 results are taken from the responses of the Tofino residents only. It's not that different if you look at the top 10 results for the whole group. There's a few differences in the order, but the themes really are the same. So these are the most highly rated thoughts. First, that Tofino's entire plan should fully adhere to the BC Restart Plan, and that we shouldn't be navigating COVID by ourselves. Second is similar somewhat to the first. As an accommodation provider in Tofino, I believe our industry should completely comply with provincial health guidelines. So following the plan, following the advice of public health officials. A very, very common thought and a highly rated thought was the national park needs to reopen as we invite or before we invite tourists. And that our impact on the environment was something people were thinking about as important to consider as we recover and respond to COVID-19. As we slowly reopen, are there ways we can improve? And the fifth most highly rated thought is quite similar to the second one. So again, this idea that accommodation providers, food and beverage service providers, businesses need to follow the guidelines that are put in place by the province. This will help keep people safe and provide the community with reassurance. The sixth most highly rated thought was around the idea of really respecting essential service workers. So this person shared a thought about the fact that he or she needs to take precautions on a daily basis because their exposure could result in many, many more exposures in one workday. This person does it gladly and asks, please, that we respect this. We also heard very strongly about small business and local business. And so the seventh most highly rated thought, that it needs to be remembered that most, if not all, businesses close voluntarily for the better good of the community and can reopen at any time. that small businesses are feeling a little left out. And it's important to remember that at the time of this survey taking place, the thought exchange taking place, we were just about to move into phase 2. So there were many, many businesses that were never told or asked or ordered by the province to close, but they did so voluntarily. The 8th most popular thought was that we need more support and services for our hospital and other services to ensure that they're funded for real-time populations. That includes visitation, so not just local residents, but including visitation, that there's a mismatch between our services and our actual population. The 9th most popular thought was that the District of Tofino should identify non-essential spending and defer those expenses until the economy is fully recovered. And we will talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. And then 10th, again, we see again this popular thought that opening Pacific Rim National Park allows everybody to spread out more, and similar to thought number 3, that it needs to reopen as we open up to visitation. So remember that we asked these survey questions about whether or not people identified themselves as being in tourism or not in tourism. And so this is where we're able to tease out a little bit of the differences. And so what I'm sharing here are the top 5 thoughts from the group of people that said, I live in Tofino and I'm involved in tourism, and the top 5 thoughts from the group of people that said, I live in Tofino, but I'm not involved in tourism. And so we do see a little bit of difference here. So on the left-hand side, for people who are involved in tourism, you can see there's a strong emphasis on planning, on following guidelines, adhering to the restart plan, and also considering our impact on the environment, and the District of Tofino identifying non-essential spending. On the right-hand side, for those residents that are not involved in tourism, we see a little bit more around the health and safety as being the first and foremost thoughts that were popular with these people. We do see a thought of encouraging some diversification from the economy, from tourism, and we also see a concern about the environment, and that's where there's some interest here, I think, in the fact that we see both perspectives, both people involved in tourism and not in tourism, and that the environment is very important to all of these people. So we were able to use the analytics in the thought exchange to tease out some strong themes, and we'll go through the 13 strong themes that came out of the thought exchange and everything that was shared. So by far, the most comments were made about recovery planning and the pace of recovery. So there were many, 172, I think, thoughts that were in this particular theme. And many of them were variations of each other, but there were some differences. By far, the dominant theme in here was around following the province, following the BC Restart Plan, that there needs to be a recovery plan in Tofino, and that this needs to be well communicated and supported strongly by all sectors. This theme also spoke a little bit to the pace of reopening, and this is where some diversity in views appeared. That there were groups of people who felt that geographic or occupancy limitations are needed to be thought about as we reopen and as we recover. And there were some very distinct and varied perspectives on the pace of reopening to tourism, with some folks feeling that we need to go slowly and some folks feeling that we need to go faster. A second theme that came out in the thoughts and ideas that were shared about how to recover and respond and what we should be thinking about was around tourism in general, around economic diversification and resilience, more sort of longer term resilience. And there was agreement that we need to learn from this pandemic, that we need to adjust and become more resilient to future threats or emergencies. That people are seeking to find a better balance between community and tourism, and that they're open to considering other types of work. There were thoughts that were shared around pre-pandemic levels of tourism not feeling sustainable, and there were many thoughts that were shared around the fact that tourism is important, and it is a part of the way we do business, and a very, very important part of our economy. There were a number of thoughts that were shared around opportunities to improve the way that tourism is conducted, with many of the thoughts theming towards something that felt more sustainable, although this wasn't always defined by people as to what that meant. Health and safety was a big theme. This was very consistent. These thoughts were very consistent between the different people who shared them around public health being a priority, that we need to protect vulnerable community members, local residents need to be and feel safe, that we need to find balance between health concerns and economic concerns, and that the collective benefits outweigh the individual benefits. The fourth theme was a little bit more personal and about community itself. So around individuals, people, our social fabric, and mental health. And the thoughts were generally of these kinds of, in this kind of nature, that there are many opinions and thoughts and that all are important. There were several thoughts shared around the need to be kind and understanding and trying to understand each other's perspectives. There were thoughts shared about the health consequences of the measures that we have taken so far to limit the impacts of COVID-19 and concerns around depression and anxiety. There were thoughts shared about needing to take care of each other, remembering that we are community first, and remembering that seniors and youth need to be included. That these are all important considerations as we respond and recover to COVID-19. Local business was the fifth of the 13 themes, that the efforts of small businesses need to be recognized, that we need to keep more dollars circulating in our local economy. And there were some thoughts that were very specific around keeping more tourism dollars here in the community. We need to shop local and support small business, that it matters that we support small business. Increasing the diversity and resilience of small businesses, that small businesses will need to adapt and innovate and change. And there were several thoughts shared around employee wages and affordability in the region and in Tofino specifically. The sixth theme was around the actual protocols of dealing with COVID-19 and customer and staff safety as we begin to reopen. So things that were important to people that we remember as we begin to recover are that staff safety is imperative. And there were several comments made, not just about work conditions, but also staff housing. That businesses must follow provincial rules and guidelines. We've seen this already. And that COVID-19 protocols need to be well communicated and transparent to everybody. There were thoughts shared from some people, presumably who are staff members, that are feeling anxious or scared about returning to work. And again, the thought that essential workers must be recognized, that they need to be recognized, and that everybody, visitors and residents, will need to follow all the protocols that are in place. The seventh theme was about vacation rentals and affordable housing. So these thoughts did not always mention both vacation rentals and affordable housing, but they often did, and they were around this theme and the interplay between vacation rentals and housing. So the thoughts shared here were about there being too many vacation rentals, that they should be limited or capped. There were several thoughts shared about unhappiness with the perception that vacation rentals had accepted guests after being asked not to, that the pandemic had exacerbated existing tensions already existing in the community about vacation rentals, that vacation rental enforcement is still needed, affordable housing remains an issue, and that some vacation rentals, as a result of this pandemic, could switch to long-term rentals. Most of the thoughts are about 32 thoughts in this category, and 3 of them were more positive facing towards vacation rentals, but the vast majority were more of this nature. The 8th theme was around the municipal budget, taxation, and infrastructure. And these 3 concepts or ideas here were extremely consistent. There were no thoughts that were expressed different to this. That the District of Tofino should reduce non-essential spending until the economy recovers, that taxes, presumably property taxes, we think that's what it meant, should be reduced, and that more of the taxes that are generated by tourism need to be invested in the town. The 9th of the 13 themes was around parks, facilities, and public beaches. Again, here we see Pacific Rim National Park Reserve needs to partially or fully reopen before or as we invite visitors back. Many comments about beaches being safe spaces for people, for visitors, and for residents, that municipal parks and facilities and washrooms should reopen. Safe outdoor recreation is an important part of recovery. There were some comments around beaches being too commercialized and that commercial use should be restricted. And there was a comment about the Children's Community Center needing to reopen. In the theme of environmental impact and sustainability, these were the predominant thoughts in this theme around thinking about our impact on the environment. Can we recover from the pandemic in a way that encourages greater protection? Several comments around how nature has responded to this pause that's been created by the pandemic. Support for wild salmon, a reminder that tourism depends on the natural environment and that we should continue to think about this, and questions that asked, what does a green, healthy community look like, and what can businesses do to be a part of that, in addition to what they are already doing, and how to support that. The 11th of the 13 themes was around food security and supply. And there were several comments about being food insecure on the West Coast and that we need to recover with greater food security. There was an important distinction made about food security being different than emergency food. And again, this speaks to the theme of longer-term resilience. The globalized food system makes us vulnerable, that we need more resiliency in food and energy. The municipality should be involved in increasing food security, and that the pandemic has helped us really realize what the end of the road means. There were several comments about the Tofino co-op and that it needs to be able to cope with the return of visitors as we recover. And there were several comments shared about visitors arriving with their own food. The 12th of the 13 themes was about First Nations and regional collaboration. These were very dominant thoughts. There were no thoughts that disagreed with these perspectives. This was about collaborating as a region, including the considerations of First Nations and collaborating with First Nations, working with Ucluelet, a reminder that Tofino is a hub for First Nations communities, that our prosperity and economy comes from First Nations lands, and that they need to be full partners in recovery and prosperity. And the last theme was about the healthcare system here on the West Coast and COVID-19 testing. And again, these were similar thoughts, no disagreement with these thoughts around the fact that our local healthcare system needs to be funded for real-time populations, that we do have healthcare capacity issues, our hospital needs to be updated, that their access for First Nations is very important. We cannot overwhelm the healthcare staff as we recover from the pandemic, and that COVID-19 testing is important and we need enough and regular testing. So the themes that we've just listed are shown here on the bar graph, and they all received average star ratings between 3 and 4.5. So there's not a lot of differentiation between the themes, although within each theme, there are some differences that appear. And that's what we're going to get into next. So there are areas of division and agreement in the thoughts and the ideas that were shared. And through the thought exchange process, it's known that these differences that appear in any thought exchange often mirror the known dynamics in a community or an organization. So as I present some of the differences here, I'd invite you to think about that. Do you feel that these mirror well-known dynamics in our community, or maybe not? Bringing these differences out in the open help us discuss and address them, because they help us understand how there are these areas of division and agreement, and we can think a little bit more deeply about why people might feel the way they do and how we can better talk to them and understand each other. Sometimes the differences in between groups of people actually speak to a similar underlying value or interest, and this is where it can really help us understand each other better and build those bridges. So this is the first difference that we'll go through, and this is what it looks like in the software when you pull up a page to look at a difference. So what this shows us is that it's kind of a Venn diagram of two groups of people. One is a group of 107 people out of the 600 participants in the thought exchange, and the other is a group of 75 people. And so the software is able to pull out thoughts where there's quite a bit of difference between the two groups. So on the left-hand side, side A, we see thoughts around waiting to open, waiting until it's safe, understanding that tourism has a huge impact financially, but that we don't want to risk an outbreak, that opening up for tourism makes people feel extremely nervous. And if you look at the star ratings, you'll see that the 4.8, the 4.9, the 4.6, the blue on the left-hand side shows you how strongly these people feel about those thoughts. But then on side B, what we see is that some people feel that we should open up tourism more quickly. So open it up ASAP, that Tofino is a place where we can do this, that we've worked hard to do what we've got here and that we can't shut it down, we can't go backwards, that we're safe and we can be able to reopen. So again, we've got side A of a group of people who feel that we need to go slowly, and we've got side B, a group of people who feel that we need to go faster. And we can see that there isn't a lot of agreement between these two groups. You either feel strongly on one way or you feel strongly in the other way. However, these two groups of people do agree on certain things. And so this is where the commonalities come out between these two different groups of people. The national park needs to reopen, that accommodation providers and food and beverage service providers need to follow the guidelines, and that the District of Tofino needs to identify non-essential spending. So despite the differences in how fast or slow these people think we should move, they do agree on these things. That's important to note. It's also easy to maybe assume that the folks who want to go slower are people who are not involved in the tourism industry, and that the folks who want to go faster are people who are involved in the tourism industry. And what the software lets us do is really dig into that, because remember, at the beginning, we asked people to identify whether they were or were not considering themselves to be involved in the industry. So what we learned is that amongst the people who wish to go more slowly, that about half of them identified as being in tourism. And then we learned on the other side that people who want to go faster, that 16% of them identify as not being in tourism. So what this shows us is that that we can't just jump to a conclusion that because somebody's involved in the industry, they're going to feel a certain way. And this, again, we need to ask ourselves, well, why might people feel these ways? And what are the underlying values and concerns? And so this is what we're asking you to think about as you look at all of the results that come out of the thought exchange, that what might be behind a person's opinion and what are they truly, truly concerned about? So in this case, here's an example that the folks who are wanting to go slower in reopening have a concern about the risk of an outbreak. And that's really evident when you read the thoughts. But folks who are interested in going faster in reopening are concerned about the immediate and long-term impacts of lower incomes on families. And there were many comments on side B around tourism supporting my family, tourism feeds my family. I have many friends involved in tourism. We need to get back to work, and we can't manage to go for a long time without these incomes. These are both very valid perspectives. Some of the other differences that we found in the data included these three differences. So a distinct group who felt strongly that we need some kind of limitations on visitation, versus a different group of people who felt that now is not the time to reinvent Tofino. We need to return to businesses as usual, and we have to ensure that the businesses survive. Again, we saw a difference between a group of people who feel strongly that we need some kind of limitations again, versus a different group of people who felt strongly that public health and the economy are intertwined and we can't turn off the economy for COVID-19. So again, it's important to ask ourselves, why might people be feeling this way and what are their underlying concerns? And I think that's where we begin to see some of the things that people actually have in common. There were a group of people who felt strongly that we need to reopen businesses and services for families and focus on families and couples as visitors over the conference event and business travel style of travel, versus a different group of people who felt strongly that we need to wait out the COVID-19 crisis, that the economy is secondary to protecting seniors and vulnerable people. So these are three examples of different groups of people who felt quite distinctly different from each other, but looking at their underlying reasons of why they might feel that way will help us to understand each other better. Despite the fact that there is disagreement in some thoughts and opinions, there were some areas that had strong mutual agreement between all groups, and this is between 4 and 5 star ratings. And so these are these things, that health and safety of everybody, of residents and workers and visitors and First Nations is paramount. that Tofino should follow the BC Restart Plan, follow the advice of public health officials, that businesses should follow provincial guidelines, that the park should reopen before or as Tofino reopens, the district should reduce all essential spending. That should say the district should reduce all non-essential spending, and we'll fix that. And that we must respect essential workers, we should consider our impact on the environment, and that we should collaborate as a region in reopening. There were also some thoughts that had strong mutual disagreement. So this is where a lot of people strongly disagreed with these thoughts. And they were around COVID-19 being a hoax, physical distancing being ineffective or being a hoax, and that public health officials are releasing a false narrative. So these were ideas that many people rated very low, indicating disagreement with the person who wrote it. So how are the results going to be used? The results have already been shared with the Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force and the Community Health Task Force. They're being used by the District of Tofino to help guide immediate recovery actions, and they're going to be used by council and staff to do some longer-term strategic planning and recovery planning. The public, that's you, we invite you to use the results to help understand the distinct and varied perspectives that are within our community and to initiate conversations with each other. And remember, you can download this report, a version of it, and dig into it a little bit more, read out the thoughts, and talk to your family members or your colleagues at work and your friends around the community about why people might think the way they're thinking. And we might use future thought exchanges to generate some more concrete ideas and actions, or to determine what Tofitians are thinking about COVID recovery maybe a few months from now. So conclusions that we've drawn from the thought exchange: we know that maintaining public health is the predominant principle of recovery. We know that there are distinct and varied perspectives about COVID-19 recovery. So, for example, I showed you the pace of reintroducing tourism was something that people disagreed on. And we saw that the differences can't always be attributed to what we might assume. So we can't attribute it to being involved in tourism industry versus not being in the industry. We see strongly that there is a desire to work collaboratively as a region in COVID-19 recovery, that there's a desire to learn from the pandemic and become a more resilient community, and that there is recognition that tourism is an important and valued economic driver. And there is a desire to conduct tourism more sustainably and equitably, but there are varied perspectives on what that means and how to do it. As we recover from COVID-19, there was a strongly shared set of thoughts around environmental sustainability, community health, social fabric, and social cohesiveness. We hope this has been interesting for you to learn about, and we invite you to dive more into the results themselves and into some of the actions that we've taken. And this includes the report and other resources and plans for COVID-19 recovery. You can see the district's response to non-essential spending in the way that we redid the budget for 2020 and redid the financial plan for 2020 to 2024. We invite you to take a look at BC's Restart Plan itself, and if you're interested in any healthcare resources or specific medical information on COVID-19, please remember you can always find detailed information at the BC Centre for Disease Control at the website shown. So thank you very much for participating in this and listening, and we hope you've enjoyed it and we hope you've learned a lot.